Mauritius is an anomaly. After independence, many African states adopted socialist policies that devastated their economies. But, interestingly enough, Mauritius did not. There were a few other island nations that also are worth noting because they too have had unique development histories, namely Seychelles and Cabo Verde, which we will certainly get to in future videos. But for now, we want to get back to the main question for this video. What in the world can explain Mauritius's long, surprising, and sustained economic growth? Well, let's learn a little bit about the island's history to start. This tiny island nation lies about 500 miles east of Madagascar, being located far south in the Indian Ocean. On a side note, it is worth noting that this island is absolutely beautiful. Look at some of these images. Anyway, back to history. For a long time, the island was uninhabited, although there is some evidence that Arab traders knew about it around the 10th century. The island was then visited by the Portuguese, settled by the Dutch in the 1600s, abandoned thereafter, occupied by the French East India Company, and then captured by the British in 1810. Under British rule, the island was populated by indentured laborers from India and began producing large amounts of cane sugar for export. Now, the history of Mauritius is very interesting, and I would encourage you to learn more about it on your own time. But let's skip forward a bit and talk about the modern development that this nation has enjoyed. Mauritius became an independent state in March of 1968, and at the outset, things were not looking great. Ethnic tensions between various people groups made the political situation a bit worrisome. In addition, Mauritius had a monocrop economy that was almost totally reliant on the export of sugar. And, furthermore, being isolated in the southern Indian Ocean, far away from markets, having a relatively unimpressive endowment of natural resources, and periodically getting struck by cyclones that damaged cane sugar output were all worrying signs that this nation would likely not succeed in its development goals. However, if you look at Mauritius today, it has thrived. In the mid-1970s, GDP per capita was around $750. Today, it is above 9,000, making it one of the wealthiest African nations. In addition, according to the Human Development Index, which attempts to look at a country's development by taking into account factors other than economic growth, Mauritius is thriving with an HDI of 0.802, just below the HDI of many Eastern European countries. So, how did Mauritius get to be so wealthy? Well, this may come as no surprise, but economists differ in their opinion as to what exactly has made Mauritius the success story that it is, and for good reason. Identifying how Mauritius was able to overcome its challenges can be a difficult task to accomplish. Nevertheless, there are important points that most economists agree at least helped Mauritius develop. The first is trade. Exports have always been a critical part of Mauritius's history, and the fact that Mauritius was able to ensure revenues from trade has undoubtedly had a long-term impact on the Mauritian economy. Trade is an important avenue for development to occur because when countries are able to earn revenues from exporting goods, those increased revenues can often be reinvested in other aspects of the production process and potentially spur manufacturing and the development of other industries. In the early years of development, Mauritius attempted to use import substitution industrialization to spur development. Import substitution industrialization, known as ISI, is when a country tries to replace foreign imports with domestic production. Some argue that this will help local economies develop, but it often fails, and in Mauritius, it did not work too well. Mauritius imposed quotas and protective tariffs in order to try and spur manufacturing during the 1960s, but these measures failed to bring the benefits they were supposed to. In response, Mauritius's government began to look towards export-oriented policies as a means to achieve growth. And, long story short, it looks like they were very successful. During the 1970s and the 1980s, trade restrictions remained fairly high, but Mauritius began to adopt policies that really helped grow some industries on the island. Mauritius created what became known as Export Processing Zones, or EPZs. Companies that operated within these zones were able to import inputs tariff-free, which meant that they were able to purchase goods at international prices and use those goods to produce exports that they would then sell at a later time. In addition, Firms that operated in these zones got to enjoy other benefits, such as tax holidays, reduced rates for water and electricity, which arguably mirrored world prices, and access to credit at a reduced rate. While one can look at Mauritius's policies during this time and see that these are not the most free market friendly policies that they could have been, the country was trending in a market-oriented direction, and growth came along with it. In addition to these policies, Mauritius was able to secure preferential access to its trading partners' markets in important sectors, which did a substantial amount to improve the country's economic position. Other economists also note that Mauritius has been open to foreign direct investment, and this has contributed significantly to the growth of the Mauritian economy by attracting funds which helped the economy become significantly more productive because foreign companies came to Mauritius as a result of the benefits that the island was offering. Unfortunately, these policies did not always have the best intentions for the workers in mind, and the Mauritian government allowed companies within EPZs to pay lower than the minimum wage in order to attract companies who may want to benefit from cheap labor. I would argue that this type of policy from the Mauritian government was unfair because they were essentially setting up different sets of rules for different companies on the island. So there are undoubtedly some complexities that need to be flushed out if someone wants to dive deep into Mauritius's economic development history. But again, in general, Mauritius was moving in a market-friendly direction, and that coincided with bringing about positive developments in the country's economy. In all likelihood, it was some combination of these factors and others that brought Mauritius into economic prosperity. And if anyone wants to learn more about the island's economy, I have placed a link in the description of this video to a book that I think covers Mauritius's economic history in further detail fairly well. Regardless, what we can say with confidence is that today, Mauritius has been an impressive standout in Africa when it comes to supporting economic freedom. Economic freedom is highly correlated with things like health, education, clean environments, innovation, societal progress, and democratic governance. And Mauritius has had some of the strongest economic freedom scores in sub-Saharan Africa for years. Look at this bar chart that shows Mauritius's economic freedom score in 2021 compared to other African nations. As you can see, it is significantly higher. Nevertheless, that doesn't mean that things will always continue to be the way they are in Mauritius. Mauritius's economic freedom score has fallen slightly in the last few years, a worrying sign that is primarily driven by increased government regulation in the economy. When governments begin to over-regulate economic actors, innovation is dampened and it is harder for the private sector to operate. Nevertheless, there is a lot to be positive about in Mauritius, and if this is a place where economic freedom continues to thrive, things will be looking good for this small island nation. In our next video, we will take a look at Cabo Verde. Stay tuned for that. Thanks for watching. If you enjoy this video, you may find some of our other work interesting. Check out another video here. Also, make sure to hit the like and subscribe button below, leave a comment, and follow the IATP on Twitter at @the_IATP.